What happens when a single moment of prejudice collides with a world of unimaginable power? On a routine transatlantic flight, a senior flight attendant, confident in her authority, makes a judgment call that will unravel her entire life. She sees a young black girl in a hoodie sitting in the most expensive seat on the plane and decides she doesn't belong. But what she doesn't know is that the girl's father doesn't just pay for the ticket, he signs the paychecks. This isn't just a story about bad customer service. It's a story about a single quiet phone call that unleashed a storm of karma so severe, it became a legend in the aviation world. Stay tuned to hear how one woman's venomous pride led to her spectacular downfall. The first-class lounge of Airline Global Airways, AGA, at JFK was less a waiting area and more a sanctuary. Bathed in the soft glow of recessed lighting, the scent of expensive leather and freshly brewed Ethiopian coffee hung in the air. Here, titans of industry whispered into their phones, and old money heirs scrolled nonchalantly through stock portfolios. It was a world of quiet, understated power. And into this world walked Serafina Blackwood, all of 16 years old, swallowed by a gray university hoodie and crowned with a pair of oversized noise-canceling headphones. She clutched a worn paperback copy of Parable of the Sower and a boarding pass for Seat 1A on flight AG 101 to London Heathrow. She was flying to spend 2 weeks with her grandmother, a trip she made every summer. It was a ritual she cherished, a brief escape from her structured life in New York. Her presence did not go unnoticed. Brenda Gable, the lead flight attendant for today's flagship transatlantic service, watched her from across the room. Brenda was a woman carved from ice, in her late 40s, with not a single blonde hair out of place in her severe chignon and a uniform so crisp it could have cut glass. She was the embodiment of AGA's brand of rigid perfection. For 25 years, she had patrolled the aisles of these metal birds, and she considered the first-class cabin her personal domain. She was the gatekeeper. Brenda's eyes narrowed. She saw the casual way the girl slumped in the plush armchair, the worn sneakers, the simple backpack that served as her carry-on. Everything about her screamed out of place. Probably a competition winner, Brenda mused with a sniff of disdain, or perhaps the beneficiary of some mileage points charity. Someone who has no idea how to behave here. Sarah felt the stare. She was used to it. She was the daughter of Silas Blackwood, a man whose name was a quiet thunderclap in the worlds of finance, logistics, and aviation. He was a self-made billionaire, a black man who had shattered every ceiling placed above him, but he had raised his daughter to value substance over style. Wealth whispers, Sarah, he'd always told her. It doesn't scream. So she wore her comfortable clothes, read her dog-eared books, and moved through the world without the fanfare her name could have afforded her. She knew the assumptions people made, and most of the time, she found them more amusing than insulting. When the boarding call for flight AG 101 was announced, Brenda made a point of gliding over to where Serafina was gathering her things. Economy and premium economy are boarding now, dear, Brenda said, her voice dripping with condescension disguised as helpfulness. First class will be in a few moments. Sarah pulled off her headphones. Oh, thank you, she replied, her voice soft but clear. But my pass is for first class. Brenda's smile didn't reach her eyes. She gave Sarah's boarding pass a cursory glance, her gaze lingering on the seat number. 1A, the throne seat. I see, she said, her tone unchanged. Well, do try not to get lost on your way. It's to the left when you get on board. The implication was clear. You're a tourist here. Don't cause any trouble. Sarah simply nodded, a small, tight knot forming in her stomach. She had a feeling this was going to be a very long flight. She walked towards the gate, the flight attendant's cold gaze following her like a searchlight. The door to the aircraft was more than just an entry point. It was a threshold, and she was about to step into a conflict she didn't ask for, but one she was more than prepared to finish. The cabin of the Airbus A380 was Airline Global's masterpiece. The first-class suites were more like small hotel rooms, each with a reclining leather seat that converted into a fully flat bed, a personal minibar, and a polished mahogany privacy door. Serafina found her seat, 1A, at the very front of the cabin. She slid her backpack under the ottoman, settled into the impossibly soft seat, and put her headphones back on, hoping to lose herself in her music before takeoff. Moments later, a shadow fell over her. It was Brenda Gable. She had a silver tray with a single glass of champagne on it. She offered it to the man in seat 2A, a kind-faced gentleman in his 60s named Mr. Harrison, who accepted it with a grateful smile. Brenda then turned, saw Serafina, and her professional mask tightened into a look of undisguised annoyance. "Miss," Brenda said, her voice sharp enough to be heard over the low thrum of the cabin, "I believe I told you. This section is for first-class passengers only." Sarah sighed and took her headphones off again. "I know. This is my seat. 1A. "I'm going to need to see your boarding pass again," Brenda demanded, her hand outstretched, palm up. There was no please or ma'am, just the raw, undisguised demand of someone who believed they were dealing with an intruder. Sarah calmly retrieved the pass from her pocket and handed it over. Brenda examined it under the cabin light as if it were a piece of evidence. She scrutinized the name, the date, the flight number, the seat assignment. She was looking for a flaw, a forgery, any excuse to validate her prejudice. Finding none, she handed it back with a flick of her wrist. "It's highly unusual," Brenda stated, as if speaking to the cabin at large. "This seat is typically reserved for our elite status frequent flyers or for full-fare passengers. It's almost never assigned to discount tickets." The man in 2A, Mr. Harrison, lowered his newspaper, a frown creasing his brow. The insult was blatant. Sarah felt a flush of anger, but her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Never let them see you lose your composure. That's giving them a victory they didn't earn." "I'm not sure what kind of ticket it is," Sarah said, her voice level and steady. "It's the one my father always books for me." Brenda let out a short, derisive laugh. "Of course, Daddy's ticket." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, venomous whisper. "Listen to me. I don't know how you managed to get this ticket, whether you scammed some miles or it's a mistake in the system, but you will be on your best behavior on my flight. You will not be a nuisance. You will speak when spoken to. Is that clear?" This was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a direct assault. Serafina looked Brenda straight in the eye. The flight attendant's blue eyes were as cold and hard as chips of ice. Sarah's own brown eyes, usually so warm, were now flinty. "What's perfectly clear," Sarah said, her quiet voice cutting through Brenda's arrogance, "is that you are being incredibly unprofessional. I am a passenger in my assigned seat. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to be left alone." Brenda recoiled as if slapped. A teenage girl in a hoodie had just challenged her authority in her cabin. Her face, a mask of professional civility, just minutes before was now twisted with fury. "That's it," she hissed. "I've had enough of your attitude." She turned on her heel and marched toward the galley. "I'm calling the gate agent. We're going to get this sorted out. We don't tolerate fraudulent passengers on Airline Global." Mr. Harrison in 2A shook his head slowly, taking a deliberate sip of his champagne. He had flown millions of miles in his life. He had seen arrogance, he had seen rudeness, but he had never seen a staff member so determined to create a problem where none existed. He looked at the young girl in 1A, who had now closed her eyes and was taking a slow, deep breath, a picture of forced calm. He had a feeling the flight attendant, Brenda, had just crossed a line from which there was no coming back. Mark, the gate supervisor, came aboard looking flustered. A delay on the flagship London route was a cardinal sin at AGA, and Brenda had summoned him with a frantic call about a ticketing irregularity in first class. He arrived to find Brenda standing with her arms crossed, glaring at the young girl in seat 1A, who was now looking out the window, seemingly ignoring the drama she was at the center of. "Brenda, what's the issue?" Mark asked, keeping his voice low. "We need to close the door." "This passenger," Brenda said, gesturing with a contemptuous flick of her head. "Her boarding pass for 1A is clearly a mistake. She doesn't have the profile for this seat. I suspect the pass is counterfeit." Mark sighed. Brenda had a reputation for being particular. He approached Serafina with an apologetic smile. "Miss, I'm so sorry to bother you. My name is Mark, the supervisor. Could I just see your pass and perhaps some ID? We'll get this cleared up in a second." Sarah handed him her boarding pass and her passport. Mark took them to his tablet, tapped in the details, and swiped a few times. His face relaxed. Everything is perfectly in order. The ticket was purchased full fare. First class, booked 3 months ago. The passport matches the name, Serafina Blackwood. You're all set, Miss Blackwood. He handed her documents back with a warm smile. Apologies for the confusion. Please enjoy your flight. He turned to Brenda, his smile vanishing. Brenda, we're clear. Let's close up. Brenda's face was a thundercloud of humiliation and rage. She had been publicly overruled. Mark walked away, leaving her stewing in the aisle. Her authority had been challenged and undermined. In her mind, the girl had somehow tricked the system, and worse, had made her look like a fool. The battle was over, but Brenda was determined to win the war. The cabin door was sealed, the safety demonstration was performed, and the giant A380 pushed back from the gate. As they taxied toward the runway, the flight attendants began their final pre-takeoff service. A junior attendant approached Sarah with a tray of pre-departure beverages, champagne, orange juice, sparkling water. Before the young woman could even offer one, Brenda's voice cut through the air from the galley. Jessica, just serve the other passengers. We're about to take off. She walked out and gave Sarah a look that could freeze fire, before taking the tray from the bewildered junior attendant and returning to the galley. It was a petty, deliberate act of exclusion. Mr. Harrison, in 2A, witnessed it all. He leaned over slightly. Young lady, he whispered, that was completely out of line. You should report her. Sarah gave him a small, weary smile. I think I'll have to. The plane rumbled down the runway and soared into the evening sky, banking gracefully over the Atlantic. Once they reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign pinged off. Brenda and her team began the elaborate first-class service. But while the other passengers were being offered hot towels, amenity kits, and wine lists, Sarah was ignored. It was as if her seat, the most prestigious on the plane, had become invisible. After 15 minutes of this pointed neglect, Serafina had had enough. She didn't press the call button. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she reached into her backpack and pulled out her phone. She enabled in-flight Wi-Fi, a service that cost a small fortune, but was complimentary for first class. She found the contact she was looking for and made a simple video call. After 2 rings, his face appeared on the screen. He was in a sprawling modern office, the city lights twinkling behind him. He looked tired but broke into a wide, warm smile the moment he saw her. There's my superstar, Silas Blackwood said, his voice a deep, comforting baritone. You on board safely? Hi, Dad. Yeah, I'm on board, Sarah replied, her voice quiet. Everything's fine, but there's a small issue with the service. Silas's smile faded, replaced by a look of sharp concern. An issue? What's wrong? It's the lead flight attendant, Sarah explained calmly, making sure not to look in Brenda's direction, though she could feel the woman's eyes on her. She seems to think I don't belong here. She's been very unwelcoming. I think she might need some additional training in customer relations. Silas Blackwood's face became still, the way a calm sea becomes still before a hurricane. He was a man who had built a global empire on logistics, efficiency, and, above all, respect. The ethos of Aurelian Global Airways, his pride and joy, was that every passenger was to be treated with dignity. To hear his own daughter was being disrespected on his own airline was an insult of the highest order. What is her name, Serafina? He asked, his voice dangerously low. She introduced herself as Brenda, the lead attendant, Sarah said. It's flight AGN01. Brenda Gable, Silas said, the name committing itself to memory. All right, don't worry about it anymore, sweetheart. I will handle this. You just try to relax and get some rest. I love you. Love you too, Dad. She ended the call. Brenda, who had been watching from a distance, sauntered over with a smirk. Calling Daddy to complain? She sneered. What's he going to do, write a strongly worded email? Serafina looked up at her, a profound, almost pitying sadness in her eyes. Something like that, she said softly. Brenda scoffed and walked away, convinced she had won. She had no idea that 35,000 feet below, a storm was gathering. Silas Blackwood had already disconnected from his daughter's call and was dialing his chief operating officer. The conversation would be very, very short, and for Brenda Gable, it would be life-altering. Silas Blackwood's office on the 90th floor of the Blackwood Tower was his command center. He ended the call with Sarah, his hands clenching into fists. The protective fury of a father merged with the cold anger of a CEO. His airline wasn't just a business, it was a statement. He had named it Airline after the Golden Age, to signify a gold standard of service and equality. He had poured millions into training programs centered on the principle of dignity as a default. And one of his own employees had just trampled all over it. He pressed a button on his console. "Get me David Smith on the line, now." David Smith was the chief operating officer of Airline Global Airways, a man who prided himself on running the tightest ship in the industry. His phone rang with the unique, urgent tone reserved for Silas Blackwood himself. He answered before the first ring finished. "Silas," he said, his voice alert. "David." Silas's voice was devoid of warmth. "I want to know everything about a lead flight attendant named Brenda Gable. She is currently working flight AG-11 from JFK to Heathrow. I want her entire service record, commendations, and complaints on my desk in the next 10 minutes. David was taken aback by the command's immediacy and severity. "Of course, Silas. Is there a problem?" "A problem doesn't begin to describe it, David. She is harassing a passenger who happens to be my daughter." A dead silence hung on the line. David Smith felt a cold dread creep up his spine. Of all the flights, of all the passengers, of all the flight attendants. "Silas, I am so sorry," he stammered. "Save the apologies," Silas cut in, his voice like iron. "Get me the file, and then I want you to connect me directly to the flight deck of AG-101. Patch me through to the captain's satellite phone. I'll hold." As David scrambled to execute the orders, a different scene was playing out in the first-class cabin. Brenda's campaign of petty tyranny continued. When meal service began, she took the orders of every other passenger first, leaving Sarah for last. "I suppose you'll want the beef," she said, not even looking at the menu. "Actually, I pre-ordered the sea bass," Sarah replied politely. Brenda feigned surprise. "Oh, I'm afraid there was a catering mix-up. We don't have that meal loaded. It's the beef or the pasta." She said it with a finality that brooked no argument, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. This was the final straw for Mr. Harrison in 2A. He was Robert Harrison, CEO of a major pharmaceutical company and one of AGA's most loyal customers. He lowered his menu. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. "I'll have the pasta. Please give the young lady my sea bass. I'm sure my meal wasn't mixed up as well." Brenda's face flushed a deep crimson. To be corrected by a premier passenger in front of everyone was a deep humiliation. "Sir, that's not necessary." "I insist," Mr. Harrison said firmly, holding her gaze until she looked away. Defeated, Brenda scurried to the galley to make the change, her mind racing. Who was this girl? To have a man like Robert Harrison defending her? It didn't make sense. Her carefully ordered world, where people were neatly categorized by their appearance and perceived status, was beginning to fray at the edges. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Captain Eva Rostova was guiding the A380 smoothly through the night sky. She was a veteran pilot, unflappable and respected. The satellite phone buzzed with a high-priority call signature she had never seen before. It was a direct patch from the C-suite. She answered, her brow furrowed with concern. "This is Captain Rostova." "Captain!" The voice on the other end was controlled, powerful, and radiating cold fury. "This is Silas Blackwood." Captain Rostova nearly dropped the phone, the owner of the airline. He had never, in her entire career, called a flight in midair. This was unprecedented. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice instantly formal. "Sir, is there an emergency?" "There is," Silas replied. "It's in your first-class cabin. You have a lead flight attendant, Brenda Gable. She has been systematically mistreating and humiliating my daughter, Serafina Blackwood, who is your passenger in seat 1A. The captain's blood ran cold. She glanced at her first officer, who was now looking at her with wide eyes. "Sir, I had no idea. I am heading back there right now." "No," Silas commanded. "Your place is on the flight deck. Here are my instructions, and they are not negotiable. I want you to send your first officer back to the galley. He will inform Ms. Gable that she is to go to Miss Blackwood's seat, apologize sincerely for her behavior, and then she is to be relieved of all duties for the remainder of the flight. She will remain in the aft galley and will not interact with another passenger until you land. Another attendant will take over first-class service immediately. Are my instructions clear, Captain? Crystal clear, Mr. Blackwood, Captain Rostova confirmed, her mind reeling. Good, Silas said. And Captain, when you land at Heathrow, a team from our corporate office will be meeting your flight. Ms. Gable will be their responsibility. Your only duty is to the safety of your passengers, especially my daughter. Ensure her flight is comfortable from this moment forward. The line went dead. Captain Rostova took a deep breath, her professional composure masking the shock she felt. She turned to her first officer. Michael, she said, her voice tight, unbuckle. We have a serious situation in the cabin, a Code 3 Indigo. There was no official Code 3 Indigo. It was a term she had just invented. It meant all hell is about to break loose. For the passengers in first class, the sight of the cockpit door opening mid-flight was unusual enough to draw attention. But when the first officer, a tall, serious man named Michael, stepped out and walked with purpose not to the lavatory, but straight to the forward galley, a hush fell over the cabin. Brenda was in the midst of plating a dessert, her movements still tight with anger from the meal service incident. She looked up, surprised to see the first officer. Is there a problem, Michael? She asked, a hint of irritation in her voice. Pilots rarely entered the cabin unless it was an emergency. Brenda, Captain Rostova needs to speak with you. Privately. Now, he said, his expression grim. He gestured toward the enclosed galley space. A flicker of unease went through Brenda. She followed him into the small space, pulling the curtain shut. Through the thin partition, the passengers could not hear the words, but the change in atmosphere was palpable. What is this about? Brenda demanded. Michael looked her square in the eye. I'm here to relay a direct order from the flight deck. You are to be relieved of your duties immediately. Brenda stared at him, dumbfounded. Relieved? That's ridiculous. On what grounds? Did that little girl in 1A make some absurd complaint? I'm the lead attendant on this flight. This order, Michael said, his voice dropping lower, doesn't come from the captain. He paused for effect. It comes from Mr. Silas Blackwood, the owner of this airline. The name hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen from the small galley. Brenda's face, which had been flushed with indignation, went completely white. It was the color of chalk, of bone. Her mind scrambled to make sense of it. Blackwood, the passenger's name. Serafina Blackwood. No, she thought. It can't be. Mr. Blackwood was just on the sat phone with the captain. Michael continued, his voice relentless. It seems the little girl in 1A is his daughter. He is displeased with the level of service she has received, specifically from you. In that moment, Brenda Gable's world fractured. The 25 years of service, the pride, the sense of untouchable authority, it all evaporated, replaced by a terrifying, sickening dread. Every dismissive glance, every condescending word, every petty act of malice she had directed at Serafina played back in her mind, but now they were bathed in a horrifying new light. She hadn't been putting a presumed freeloader in her place. She had been insulting the daughter of the man who owned the very air she was flying in. Her mouth went dry. Her legs felt weak. What are the orders? She whispered, her voice a hoarse croak. First, Michael instructed, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. You will go to seat 1A. You will apologize to Miss Blackwood. It will be sincere. Second, you will report to the aft crew rest area and remain there until we have begun our descent. You will not speak to any other passengers or crew unless spoken to by the captain. Attendant Jessica will be taking over as lead for first class. Am I understood? Brenda could only nod, her mind a whirlwind of panic. This was a nightmare. This was career-ending, life-ending. She pulled back the curtain and walked into the cabin like a ghost. Every eye was on her. She felt stripped bare, her arrogance and authority now looking like the pathetic posturing of a fool. She approached seat 1A. Serafina was reading her book, or pretending to. She looked up as Brenda approached. Brenda's hands were trembling. She clasped them in front of her to keep them still. She bowed her head slightly. Miss Blackwood, she began, her voice cracking. I need to apologize. My behavior toward you since you boarded has been inexcusable. It was unprofessional and it was deeply disrespectful. There is no excuse for it. I am truly and profoundly sorry. The apology hung in the silent cabin. Serafina looked at the woman before her, a woman who, just an hour ago, had been the picture of haughty power and was now utterly broken. There was no triumph in Sarah's heart, only a deep well of sadness. Thank you, Serafina said, her voice quiet but firm. I accept your apology. There was nothing else to say. Brenda turned and, without making eye contact with anyone, began the long, humiliating walk of shame down the aisle, past the pitying and astonished faces of the other passengers, to her exile at the back of the plane. Mr. Harrison watched her go, then caught Serafina's eye. He gave her a slow, respectful nod. The power dynamic in the gilded cage of first class had been inverted, not by shouting or arguing, but by a quiet phone call that had summoned judgment from the heavens. The remainder of the flight passed in a surreal state of calm. The junior flight attendant, Jessica, now thrust into the role of lead, was a whirlwind of apologetic efficiency. She approached Serafina with a reverence usually reserved for visiting royalty. Miss Blackwood, she said, her voice trembling slightly, is there anything at all I can get for you? The sea bass you ordered is available. We can have it for you in a few minutes. Or would you prefer something else? A cheese plate? A dessert? Can I get you a drink? The sea bass would be lovely, thank you, Jessica, Sarah replied with a gentle smile, trying to put the nervous young woman at ease. And a sparkling water, please. The service for the rest of the flight was flawless. Jessica and the other attendants were attentive but not intrusive, creating the peaceful, luxurious atmosphere that should have existed from the beginning. Serafina ate her meal, watched a movie, and eventually reclined her seat into a bed, pulling the soft duvet over her. But she couldn't sleep. Her mind kept replaying the image of Brenda's face, the shock, the fear, the utter devastation. She hadn't wanted to ruin the woman's life. She had just wanted to be treated with the same basic respect as everyone else. As the plane began its final descent into London, the first light of dawn streaking the sky with shades of pink and orange, Brenda Gable re-emerged from the crew area, her face pale and drawn. As per protocol, she took her jump seat for landing, her eyes fixed on a point on the cabin wall, seeing nothing. The confident, imperious woman who had boarded in New York was gone, replaced by a hollow shell. The A380 touched down at Heathrow with barely a whisper. As it taxied to the gate, Captain Rostova's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London Heathrow. We ask that all passengers remain in their seats for a few moments as we have a special disembarking procedure this morning. A murmur went through the cabin. As the jet bridge connected, the main door opened to reveal not the usual ground staff, but two individuals in sharply tailored suits, a man and a woman, with grim expressions and AGA corporate pins on their lapels. Standing just behind them was a tall, elegantly dressed woman in her late 60s with a warm, welcoming smile. Grandma! Sarah's face broke into a genuine, happy grin for the first time in hours. Her grandmother, Elena, boarded the plane. The two corporate suits stood aside respectfully to let her pass. She embraced Serafina warmly. Oh, my sweet girl. Your father told me what happened. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. I'm okay, Grandma, Sarah whispered. The man in the suit, the head of AGA's European operations, then approached. Miss Blackwood, he said in a hushed, respectful tone, we have a car waiting to take you and your grandmother directly from the tarmac. Your luggage will be collected and brought to you. Please allow us to escort you. As Serafina and her grandmother were led off the plane and down a private set of stairs to a gleaming black sedan waiting on the tarmac, the other first-class passengers, including Mr. Harrison, watched in awe. This was a level of service beyond VVIP. This was the treatment reserved for the family who owned it all. The visual confirmation of her identity was absolute. Upstairs, the rest of the passengers began to deplane. Brenda remained frozen in her jump seat until every last one of them was gone. Finally, the woman in the suit, AGA's head of human resources for Europe, walked over to her. Brenda Gable, she asked, though the answer was obvious. Her voice was cold, professional, and final. "Please collect your personal belongings. You'll be coming with us." Brenda numbly gathered her purse. As she was escorted off the plane her crew had once called home, she saw her colleagues, the other flight attendants and pilots, being held back. They watched her with a mixture of pity and fear. She was no longer one of them. She was an outcast. She was led through a series of sterile, unmarked corridors in the airport's underbelly, far from the public eye, into a small, windowless conference room. The two executives sat opposite her. The man slid a thick file across the table. Her name was on it. This wasn't just a disciplinary meeting. This was an execution. The long, hard descent from 35,000 feet was over. She had hit rock bottom. The meeting in the Heathrow conference room was brutally efficient. Brenda was not asked for her side of the story. The decision, she was told, had already been made by the highest levels of the corporation. Her actions towards Miss Blackwood were cited as a catastrophic failure to adhere to the company's core values of dignity and respect. It was termed gross misconduct. Her employment with Airline Global Airways was terminated, effective immediately. Her 25 years of service were wiped out in 25 minutes. Because the termination was for cause, she would forfeit her severance package and a significant portion of her pension. She would be flown back to New York in economy the next day. Her staff ID and wings were clipped from her uniform and placed on the table with a quiet, final click. But the karma that hit Brenda Gable was far deeper and more insidious than just losing her job. In the days that followed, the full weight of her actions came crashing down. An internal investigation was launched, prompted by Silas Blackwood himself. He wanted to know if this was an isolated incident or a symptom of a larger disease. Mr. Harrison, the CEO in Seat 2A, provided a detailed, scathing witness statement, not only about Brenda's behavior towards Serafina, but also recounting his unease with her general demeanor. The investigators dug into Brenda's personnel file. What they found was a subtle but disturbing pattern. Over the years, there had been a dozen minor passenger complaints filed against her. None were serious enough on their own to warrant more than a note in her file, but viewed together, a chilling picture emerged. The complaints were almost exclusively from non-white passengers, who described her as dismissive, condescending, or unhelpful. She had been a master of plausible deniability, her prejudice veiled just enough to avoid serious repercussions. Until now. The incident with Serafina wasn't an anomaly. It was the day her mask finally slipped completely. The story leaked, as such stories always do. An anonymous post on a popular aviation forum detailed the meltdown of a senior FA on AGU 101 after she harassed the owner's daughter. The industry is a small, gossipy world. Brenda Gable became a pariah. She was blacklisted. No other major international carrier would touch her. Her pristine reputation, the very foundation of her identity, was shattered. Within 6 months, her life had unraveled. Unable to find work that could support her expensive mortgage, she had to sell the pristine suburban home she had lorded over her neighbors. She took a job as a cashier at a high-end grocery store. The irony of her serving the very people she once judged not lost on her. The crisp uniform was replaced by a cheap polyester apron. The polite, deferential passengers were replaced by impatient customers. She had spent her life ascending to what she saw as the pinnacle of her profession, only to be cast down into a quiet, humiliating obscurity. But the story doesn't end with Brenda's downfall. It ends with Serafina's rise. The incident had a profound effect on her. She saw how easily prejudice could fester, even in the polished environment her father had worked so hard to build. She realized that her privilege gave her not just a shield, but a voice. She sat down with her father. "Dad," she said, "I don't want what happened to be just about punishing one person. I want it to mean something." Inspired, Silas and Sarah worked together. They established a new company-wide training program for all AGA employees, from baggage handlers to pilots. It was an immersive, scenario-based program focused on identifying and dismantling unconscious bias. It taught empathy, cultural sensitivity, and the core principle that dignity was not a perk for the wealthy, but a right for everyone. They named it the Serafina Initiative. Serafina, though still young, became the face of the program. She spoke to new hire classes, sharing her story not as a tale of privilege, but as a lesson in perspective. She championed the idea that the true measure of luxury wasn't in the champagne or the leather seats, but in the unwavering respect shown to every single person who chose to fly with them. The ripple effect was extraordinary. Aurelian Global Airways didn't just become known for its luxury, but for its culture. It became the gold standard not just for service, but for humanity. A terrible, ugly incident born from one woman's prejudice had been transformed into a powerful catalyst for positive, lasting change, touching thousands of employees and millions of passengers. The hardest karma wasn't just Brenda's fall, it was that her victim, the girl she deemed worthless, went on to build a better, kinder world from the ashes of her prejudice. 2 years passed. The world moved on, as it always does. For Aurelian Global Airways, the incident on flight AG-101 became a footnote in a larger success story, a catalyst that had spurred the revolutionary Serafina initiative and cemented their reputation as an industry leader in customer experience. For Serafina, it was a formative experience that shaped her path toward advocacy. But for Brenda Gable, time did not move on. It stood still, trapping her in an endless loop of that one flight, that one catastrophic mistake. Her new life was a monochrome existence compared to the vibrant, dynamic world she once inhabited. She now worked as a senior cashier at the Gilded Truffle, an upscale organic grocery store in a wealthy suburb. The name was a cruel joke, a constant reminder of the gilded cages she once flew between continents. She still wore a uniform, a drab green apron over a white polo shirt, and she still forced a smile for customers. But the authority was gone. The respect was gone. She was no longer the gatekeeper to an exclusive world. She was just the person who asked, paper or plastic? The bitterness had curdled inside her, becoming a hard, indigestible stone of resentment. In her mind, she was the victim. She hadn't been wrong. She had simply been unlucky. She had encountered a plant, a secret princess hiding in pauper's clothes, and had failed a test she didn't know she was taking. She refused to see her actions as prejudice, only as an error in judgment. It was a subtle distinction, but in the desolate landscape of her pride, it was the only hill she had left to stand on. She would watch her former colleagues on social media, posting pictures from layovers in Rome, Tokyo, or Rio. They were living her life, the one that had been stolen from her. The envy was a physical ache, a phantom limb where her wings used to be. One Tuesday afternoon, during the pre-dinner rush, a man pushed his cart into her checkout lane. He was in his late 60s, with a kind face and silver hair, dressed in a tailored blazer. Brenda's hands froze over the scanner. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It was him, Mr. Robert Harrison, the CEO from Seat 2A. He didn't recognize her. Why would he? In her apron, with her hair pulled back in a simple, unlacquered ponytail, and the exhaustion of a double shift etched onto her face, she was not the immaculate, formidable flight attendant he had challenged at 35,000 feet. To him, she was just part of the store's scenery. "Just these for me today," he said pleasantly, placing a bottle of expensive olive oil, a loaf of artisan bread, and a small wedge of French cheese on the conveyor belt. Brenda's training took over. Her hands, clammy and trembling, began to scan the items. Beep, beep, beep. The sounds were deafening in the roaring silence of her mind. This man had witnessed her peak, and now he was witnessing her nadir. He had seen her command a cabin, and now he was watching her bag his groceries. The humiliation was a hot fluid rising in her throat. "That will be $58.74, she managed to say, her voice thin and reedy. He handed her a crisp $100 bill. As she counted out his change, he glanced at her name tag. It was a simple printed label, Brenda. His eyes flickered from the name tag to her face. For a fleeting second, a glimmer of recognition sparked in his gaze. A frown, faint as a shadow, creased his brow. He was connecting the dots. The name, the face now stripped of its severe makeup, the location in a neighborhood he knew was near the airport. Brenda's breath caught. She braced herself for the question, for the accusation, for the pitying, "Don't I know you from somewhere?" But it never came. Robert Harrison was a man of immense discretion. He looked at the broken woman before him, the ghost of the arrogant attendant from that flight, and he made a choice. He would not acknowledge their shared past. To do so would be a needless cruelty. He simply took his change and the paper bag. "Thank you," he said, his voice neutral, betraying nothing. But as he turned to leave, he paused and looked back at her. His eyes were not filled with pity or triumph, but with a quiet, profound sadness. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was not a greeting. It was a final, silent acknowledgement of her fall. Then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd of wealthy shoppers. Brenda stood paralyzed, clutching the edge of the counter to keep from collapsing. The nod had been worse than any confrontation. It was a confirmation. He knew. He saw what she had become. She was no longer a person of consequence. She was just a ghost, haunting the aisles of someone else's life. The line of customers behind him was growing impatient. "Ma'am?" A woman's sharp voice cut through her haze. "Are you open?" Brenda turned, her practiced smile a painful mask, and replied, "Yes, I'm ready for you now." Far from the sterile aisles of the Gilded Truffle, at a state-of-the-art training facility near Airline Global's corporate headquarters, another legacy was being forged. The room was designed to look exactly like an AGA first-class cabin used for service and safety simulations. But today it was a classroom. At the front of the cabin stood Serafina Blackwood. Now 19, she was a poised and articulate young woman, her university hoodie replaced by a simple, elegant blazer. She moved with a quiet confidence that had been forged in the fire of that flight 2 years ago. She was addressing the airline's newest class of flight attendant recruits. "A ticket buys a passenger a seat on this aircraft," she said, her voice resonating with passion and conviction. "It does not buy them a score on a social ladder. It doesn't tell you their story, their value, or their history. Our job is to see the person, not the ticket. The core principle of the Serafina Initiative, the core of AGA's promise, is that we offer everyone the same thing, regardless of who they are, our unconditional respect." Watching from the side was Jessica, the junior attendant who had been so nervous on that flight. She was now a lead trainer for the initiative, a promotion she had earned through her exceptional empathy and dedication. She had become one of Serafina's closest collaborators. The incident that had terrified her had also empowered her, showing her the kind of leader she wanted to be. The new recruits were captivated. They knew the story of Flight AGA 101. It was now a central part of their training curriculum, a case study in what not to do. They looked at Serafina not as the owner's daughter, but as the living embodiment of the company's ethos. One day, Brenda found herself drawn back to the place that represented both her greatest triumphs and her most profound failure. JFK Airport. She didn't have a ticket. She just wanted to be near it, to feel the rumble of the jets, to smell the burnt kerosene, to remember who she was. She wandered through the departures hall, a ghost invisible to the throng of travelers. Her feet carried her, as if by some magnetic pull, toward the Airline Global Terminal. It had been renovated. It was brighter, more modern, with massive digital displays advertising its award-winning service. One particular display caught her eye. It was a sleek video about the company's culture. It featured smiling employees, diverse passengers, and a voiceover talking about a commitment to dignity. And then, for a brief moment, Serafina's face appeared on the screen, speaking about the importance of empathy. Brenda felt a cold wave of nausea. She turned away and walked blindly, needing to escape. She found herself in a quieter, less trafficked corridor that led to the corporate offices and the flagship first-class lounge she once commanded. And there, mounted on a polished marble wall, was a large, beautifully framed plaque. It was new. Engraved in gold lettering were the words, "Airline Global Airways, dedicated to a gold standard of service and humanity. This facility and our guiding principles are inspired by the Serafina Initiative. Dignity is not a destination, but the path we take together." Brenda stared at the plaque, at the name that was forever etched into the foundation of the company she had been exiled from. Her entire 25-year career had been erased, leaving not even a ripple. She was a cautionary tale, a nameless anecdote in a training manual. This young woman, the girl she had tried to humiliate, had her name in gold. Her legacy was institutional. It was permanent. In that moment, the last vestiges of Brenda's resentment finally crumbled, replaced by a vast, empty hollowness. It hadn't been about luck. It hadn't been a test. It had been a choice. She had chosen prejudice, and the world had chosen to move on without her, building a better version of itself in her wake. She turned and walked away from the plaque, from the terminal, from the life that was no longer hers. She didn't look back. There was nothing left to see. The ghost in the aisle finally faded, leaving only the quiet hum of an airline that had learned to fly higher. And that's the incredible story of how a single act of prejudice on a flight to London didn't just end a career, it sparked a revolution in corporate culture. It's a powerful reminder that the choices we make, the snap judgments we cast upon others, can have consequences we can't even imagine. Brenda Gable lost her job and her identity, but her true punishment was becoming an unwilling catalyst for the very inclusivity she fought against. Serafina Blackwood, in her quiet dignity, proved that true power isn't about putting someone in their place, but about lifting everyone up to a better one. If this story resonated with you and you believe that karma, respect, and dignity are values worth talking about, please hit that like button to let us know. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications for more real-life stories that will make you think. Thank you for listening.